Nothing, Kyle said, his voice apprehensive, as if waiting for something to jump out at them. Exactly, Jason said. Something really weird is going on here. Derek couldn't hide the nervousness in his voice. We need to get out of here. Now, he said. His loss of confidence and bravado, along with Kyle's lack of comedic relief, set Megan to sobbing even harder. I knew we shouldn't have come, she said. Amber snorted. Well, then you should have said something, you little mouse, she said. Guys, come on, let's not argue, Sophie said. We need to figure out how to get out of here. We know the way out of here, Jason said. But that's not the issue. They all turned to him. Ryan steps up beside him. What do you mean? He said. Jason looked out among the trees. His eyes searched for something, anything that might tell him why this was happening. I mean, he said at last, that something is doing this to us on purpose. Ryan slapped his forehead. Oh, great. Not you too, he said. Jason, I thought you at least had a head on your shoulders. Are you suggesting that this is the work of one of those dumb stories that our parents fed us as little kids? I know how it sounds, Jason said, his voice even. It sounds crazy. Loco, for real, Kyle said, though most of the humor was gone from his voice. Let's just say for a moment that what you are saying is true, Derek said. Jason was not thrilled to see how excited his eyes had become. He seemed to relish the thought of something spooky happening. Then again, this had been his aim from the start. What now? Jason thought for a moment. He really hadn't thought that far ahead. Amber, however, didn't hesitate for long. She brandished her stick. We find whatever it is and kill it, she said. When everyone saw that she was dead serious, they all started to howl with laughter. Jason clapped Amber on the back. You're a genius, he said. Whatever would we do without you? Amber gave him a warning look, and he took his hand away before the stick came swinging at him. Sophie came forward with a more level-headed option. We have to test this theory that something strange is happening, she said. We need to determine what we are dealing with. Intriguing, Ryan said, a hand touching his chin. What do you have in mind? Sophie explained her plan. It was really very simple. If they really were going in a circle, then they had to split up. One party goes one way, towards the drain land. The other would go towards town. If the loop was real, they would meet again. Otherwise, they would reach their destinations without incident. Hopefully, anyway. Jason, Sophie, and Amber were the home team. Derek, Kyle, Ryan, and Megan were the drain team. They started off just before 15:30 hours. As Sophie led them towards the west, Jason looked back as they were about to lose sight of the drain team. He didn't have time to truly analyze what he saw because they disappeared behind the tree line as he was peeking back. For a moment, he thought they seemed much farther away than what they should have. It looked like they had walked hundreds of feet instead of the dozen or so yards the teams had between them. It gave him an eerie feeling. Come on, Amber said, tugging at his arm and startling him. Sophie is leaving us behind. Didn't realize you were there, Jason said, stumbling along after her. Yeah, you were zoning out like an idiot, Amber said. What were you staring at? You didn't notice, Jason said. Sophie heard his question and stopped, turning around. What are you talking about? She said. Amber pointed back. Yeah, I saw, she said. Saw what? Sophie said, an edge of nervousness in her voice. The drain team, Amber said. When we looked back, they looked really far away. When Sophie gave her a look, she went on. Like, too far away. Huh, Sophie said, and she bit her lip. Perhaps we should go back. No, Jason said with firmness. We have to complete the experiment. If we are caught in some freaky Twilight Zone loop, then we need to start coming up with ideas on what to do next, one step at a time. Sophie nodded. Sure, that sounds right. Let's go then, she said. It felt like they walked for a long time. The silence in the woods was deafening. No matter how far they went, they never heard the sound of birds or insects. All was silent but for the crunch of the underbrush from their footfalls. Jason couldn't suppress the mounting dread building in his gut. When he heard similar footfalls from ahead of them, he wasn't surprised. Dismayed, sure, but definitely not very surprised. Soon, the two teams were face to face. None of them spoke for a long time, their expressions each a mirror of one another's fear, of the realization that a supernatural and unexplainable force had them in its grip. Time was moving fast, and the sun rode across the sky in its perfect arc towards the horizon. It was still the height of summer, so the light would last until late, but Jason knew that at least some of their parents would be missing them by now. If word got out that 7 of the town's kids have gone missing, it would be pandemonium. They needed to get back as soon as possible. Little did he know, it would be a long time until they were back home again. Ever since they came back together, Megan hadn't stopped crying. Sophie comforted her with soft words in her ear and rubbing her arms in a reassuring gesture. The girl was basically inconsolable. No one blamed her, though Derek looked ready to comment on how annoying her blubbering was getting. Jason also found it hard to think with her sobbing and talking about wanting to go home and how scared she was. He wanted to scream. They were all scared, but crying wasn't going to do anything. He really regretted at that moment letting Megan tag along. Amber became rambunctious, which happened even at the best of times. That girl had trouble sitting still for even 5 minutes, let alone standing around for what seemed like hours on end. She complained in a loud voice. "I'm sick of this," she said. Only Amber seemed to be mostly unperturbed by the strange stream of events that have unfolded during their day so far. Jason should have known. Amber was one of those kids that got tough because she had to. Her family life was hard, and it made her some type of way, as they liked to put it. Yet it wasn't a bad thing. It was hard to be around sometimes, sure, but it certainly wasn't bad. "Would you shut up?" Ryan said. "I can't stand both you and Megan being babies." Amber snarled and rounded on him. "You want to call me a baby again, numb nugget?" Jason stepped in between them before they started fighting. Goodness knows if Amber started throwing her fists around, she wasn't going to stop until one of them was unconscious on the ground. That's the last thing they needed. "Please, stop," Jason said, commanding in a diplomatic and logical tone. "We just need to think." "We've been thinking," Amber said. "Thinking and doing nothing. I can't stand it anymore." "I know," Jason said. "I'm sick of it too. I don't know what to do." "Perhaps we just have to pick a different direction," Kyle said. "You know, mix it up a bit." Everyone turned to him. He gave an exasperated sigh, as if he had to explain something super simple to imbeciles. "Look, we have tried to do our test along the line of our trail, meaning frontwards and backwards. Why don't we try changing the needle of the compass? We go neither towards the pipeland nor towards home." Ryan was impressed. "Dude, that's like the smartest thing you ever said," he said, then added, "It's too bad it won't ever happen again." "Haha," Kyle said in a sardonic tone. "Now who's the stupid funny guy? I don't see you being useful, so someone had to step up." Thankfully, this time Ryan did not take the bait. He turned away from Kyle and looked back at Jason. He crossed his arms across his chest. "Well, I hate to admit it, but Kyle's right. None of us are being useful," he said. No one had to tell him what an unnecessary comment that was. Even so, No one could think of anything else. At length, they decided to go with Kyle's suggestion. "Okay," Derek said, making sure everyone was listening. "My team will head north, while Sophie's heads south. Hopefully, a change in direction breaks the spell, or whatever." They all shared the same sentiment. This time, Amber and Sophie both joined Jason. When they looked back at Derek's team, dread pulsed inside them as they saw something impossible unfold before their eyes. With every step that the other team took, it seemed they had gone at least 3. Before long, they were almost out of sight. "What in the world?" Sophie said. "That's unnatural. Splitting up isn't going to do anything." Jason said, feeling in his bones that it would just end up the same. Amber agreed. "And I'm hungry," Amber said, crouching. "Even the bark of the trees is starting to look delicious." "Don't eat the trees, you wild animal," Jason said. "But you are right. We can't be out here forever." A faint sound moved through the silent woods. At first, they all thought it was just their imaginations. Then it came again. It was a haunting, drawn-out tone. It rose, and then cut off suddenly again and again. "That's no bird call," Sophie said, clutching at Jason, who was rigid with fear. Amber appeared merely curious. "Maybe it's a bobcat or something," she said. "They sound pretty crazy." "That's no bobcat," Jason said. He strained his ears, listening for all he was worth. The sound came again and again. It wasn't in regular intervals like what animals or machines do. It was less uniform. It was something that Jason had heard before. He knows this sound. If only he can just put the word that is on the tip of his tongue out of his mouth. "I think," Sophie said, paling. "I think that's screaming." They all looked at each other. Then Jason took off running after Derek's team. "Come on," he said to the others. They crashed through the underbrush at breakneck speed. Branches slapped at their bare skin and drew blood. This didn't slow them down. Jason pushed them onwards. Already it seemed to him that the screaming was getting just a little bit clearer with every step. "Jason! Sophie! Amber!" Voices called from up ahead. Those were the voices of Derek, Ryan, and Kyle. Jason was spurred on by the sound of their names being called. Had something happened? Was someone hurt? "We're coming," he said back at them. He didn't know if his voice reached them because they kept on calling non-stop. It didn't strike him that something was not quite right about the voices of his friends until later. Jason, Sophie, and Amber charged through the trees, chasing the sound of their names. Then, out of nowhere, they burst into a clearing in the woods. Their shoes go from crunching damp leaves to stamping on soft grass. They are so surprised that they almost smash headlong into Megan, who was resting on a rock. She squeaked as the 3 of them dodged just in time, throwing themselves out of the way. Jason managed to maneuver himself into a smooth roll and come back to his feet with the grace of a dancer. Sophie managed to roll, but then tripped on a branch and went sprawling on her back. Meanwhile, Amber face planted into the grass without an ounce of grace to be seen. She moaned into the ground, but seemed unhurt. Derek, Kyle, and Ryan, who were further inside the clearing, heard the commotion and turned back to them. They had been staring at something ahead. When Jason got up and brushed himself off, he gasped as he caught sight of what had their attention. It was a house, a dark, abandoned house in the middle of the woods.